Thank you. Good afternoon, esteemed task force. My name is Kika Keith, and I'm appreciative of this opportunity to contribute to the Department of Justice's work on reparations. There are distinct parallels between the institution of slavery that was constitutionally and statutorily sanctioned by the United States and the history of the war on drugs that is marred by racism and was enforced with racist motivations. I stand here before you today as a drug war survivor. Prior to 2017, when I learned about the legalization of recreational cannabis in Los Angeles, drug war survivor wasn't even a term that I would have used to describe myself. I was a proud owner of a beverage manufacturing company with the first to market drink Gorilla Life in Whole Foods, Bristol Farms, and Gelson's, a single mother of three beautiful daughters from South Central LA, who was taught by my parents to fight for justice and to be a voice to the voiceless. And though I never heard or used the term drug war survivor, I knew I was raised my whole life in impoverished neighborhoods. South Central Los Angeles was indicative of Black communities across this country that were destroyed by the systematic declaration of war from the infiltration of drugs on the streets of our inner cities. Across the U.S., Black men on average were 8 times more likely to be arrested and convicted for cannabis than white men. The collateral damage is reprehensible. The fabric of the Black family was broken into the prison system, the foster care system, and the graveyards. We must consider that it wasn't just a question of arresting criminals. It was a question of criminalizing a whole community and inflicting upon them mental health issues that led to psychological warfare on the whole African American community, the Black family. And when we speak of reparations, we must consider the legacy of the war against our people that had been waged from the days that we were kidnapped and brought to these shores. Our very beginning speaks to traumatic stress passed down from generations of protracted war that has been visited upon us not only by civil society, but by government policy as well. Harry J. Anslinger, the father of the war on drugs, was a notorious racist who didn't keep his overtly racist comments and propaganda behind closed doors. And similar racist motives drove the expansion of the war on drugs during the presidency of Richard Nixon, with the signing of the Controlled Substance Act into law, which remains intact today. John Ehrlichman, Nixon's aide on domestic affairs, gave us great insight on the government's intentional, immoral, and inhumane acts against Black people, as he revealed in an interview following his time at the White House, and he stated, the Nixon campaign in 1968, the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and Black people. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the Vietnam War or Black people, but by getting public to associate the hippies with marijuana and Blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. He went on to say, we could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break their meetings, vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Marijuana criminalization is a textbook case for how structural racism and white supremacy are deeply embedded across laws and policies in the United States. Its economy was built off of and benefited from enslavement. These infamous drug laws have continued the long American history of appealing to white people by promising to punish Black people. Today, mass incarceration has led to nearly 3 million children to live in homes where one or more parent is incarcerated. And so when I say drug war survivor, the numbers make it real. 1 in 9 Black children are in foster care, compared to 1 in 57 white children. Throughout the 1980s and into the 2000s, ad campaigns like the infamous "This Is Your Brain on Drug" commercials flooded airways across classrooms all across America. Black people in particular have borne the brunt of arrests and incarcerations despite similar and even some reports greater rates of use by white people. And while anti-marijuana messaging pushed cannabis as a gateway drug, it was more accurately a gateway to the carceral system. Case in point, in Los Angeles, Black people represent 8% of the population and yet an astonishing 40% of the arrests. In Oakland, African Americans consisted of 70% of the arrests, but only made up 30% of the population. And in our state capital, African Americans consisted 43% of the arrests while making up only 15% of Sacramento's population. In just a few years, cannabis has transformed from an illicit product to the 5th most valuable crop in the United States, a multi-million-dollar industry. This economic success, however, is not benefiting the Black communities targeted by the war on drugs. The capital-intensive cannabis market is dominated by white-owned businesses, a direct consequence of the wealth disparities that Black communities experience because of cannabis criminalization. A growing recondition of this hypocrisy is developing, leading state legislators and municipal governments to develop cannabis equity programs. And these programs seek to remediate harms of past criminalization through expungement, through creating cannabis equity licenses for communities harmed by prohibition. But unfortunately, these efforts often fall short of achieving their goals, largely because these programs don't specifically list Black communities as the most impacted by the war on drugs. Despite the overwhelming evidence that the war on drugs was created and enforced to oppress Black community, equity programs almost always shy away from using race-conscious measures or minority business designations. Ironically, this timidness is traced back to the 14th Amendment, a post-Civil War amendment passed to stop states from denying the rights granted to recently freed slaves. The Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment mandates that government treat similarly situated persons equally under the law. And in interpreting the 14th Amendment, the Supreme Court of the United States takes a colorblind approach to race, taking this position that all race-conscious classifications are inherently suspect when the objective is helping minority populations experiencing racial discrimination. And I've witnessed this firsthand, the damning effects of this colorblind approach in Los Angeles, as the city established a social equity program to repair the grave injustice of the people most harmed by the war on drugs, but instead was plagued by delays, scandal, bureaucratic blunders, costing intended beneficiaries, a handful of Black people, hundreds of thousands of dollars in losses. Less than 20% of the 200 retail licenses on track to receive a license through the program are Black-owned. Once again, our Black community, most disproportionately targeted by marijuana arrests, is again facing discrimination. In 2017, when I learned about the LA's program and how to create a pathway, I knew that it was for families like mine who was traumatized by my stepfather, who served 7 years in jail for selling a dime bag of weed, $10 worth of weed. We were sold a dream, hope from our local state and politicians like Council President Herb Weston, who positioned the future of legal cannabis as a chance to close the wealth gap between Black and white families, to atone for the damage of the war on drugs, and maybe provide some small recompense for the entire sordid history of racism in the United States. And as a Black woman, this resonated to my core as I understood the industrial history of this country that would not allow Black people to have significant ownership opportunities in the cotton industry, the tobacco industry, automobile and alcohol industry, to name a few. By 2018, we quickly realized that social equity program was designed to fail. No budget, no technical assistance, no education, no access to capital. The requirement to have a property to apply, my location on Crenshaw Boulevard, was $12,000 a month. Once again, Black people were set up for predatory investments with sharecropper agreements. Once again, it's obvious that even with legislation in place for repair to justice, the true intent of the social equity program was being dismantled in front of our very eyes. After 3 years of grassroots educating and lobbying, we formed the Social Equity Owners and Workers Association to organize our people, unionize our efforts, and cooperatively raise money for a legal fund. We filed a lawsuit against the city of LA and later settled for 100 additional social equity retail licenses. 1,340 days later, I opened the first Black woman-owned dispensary in Los Angeles, Gorilla RX Wellness Co., or as we call it, the house that the people built. And while states repeal mandatory sentences, they continue to profit off the forced labor of incarcerated people. State lawmakers must do the necessary work of determining what reparations are owed to Black community for the damage it has inflicted. True repair to justice will mean that not only cash payments to be made for past economic theft from Black communities, but also the acknowledgement and the intentional dismantling of systems that perpetuate discrimination today. And as the task force studies the ongoing effects of the institution of slavery and its legacy of persistent systemic structures of discrimination on living African Americans, I assert that marijuana legalization offers an opportunity for a blueprint for how to begin rooting out the white supremacy enmeshed in U.S. laws. This begins with challenging the 14th Amendment to use race-conscious classifications in defining social equity program beneficiaries of the trauma and injustice bestowed on Black African Americans, and to develop models like the Chicago suburb of Evanston that has become the first U.S. city to use tax money from the sale of recreational marijuana to make reparations available to its Black residents for past discrimination and the lingering effects of slavery. Thanks again for this opportunity to testify, and I would like to give special thanks to Senator Bradford and Assemblymember Joan Sawyer, who have been champions of cannabis equity for Black people in the state of California. Blessings.